get us started. So we will be recording this session. And let me, all right. So thanks for joining us today. We know you had a lot of choices today. We're really thrilled to be meeting with some of the health and physical education teachers. You all are the first large cohort of teachers we've been able to bring this presentation to, so we're very excited. We hope you will throw your questions at us so we can continue to build out content to help support pregnant parenting students as you work with them this year in your classrooms. So I am Jennifer Pitt. I'm Director of Pregnant Parenting Student Services for the district. My responsibilities include overseeing our Elect Pregnant Parenting Student Supports Initiative, which is a comprehensive support program, in addition to overseeing implementation of Policy 234, which is the policy approved by our school board to outline educational rights for our pregnant parenting student population. I have actually been working with Elect for the last 20 years in schools throughout the city. I started as a case manager in Kensington and Frankfurt high schools and have had the opportunity to work in a number of district buildings before coming on board officially as a district employee. This is my 4th school year in this capacity as the director of the program. So I'm really excited. I've had an extensive history and really looking forward to spending this next hour with you talking about what we offer and our Policy 234. But in order to make sure the language I'm using best fits the audience we have for today, I'd love if folks would drop in the chat whether you're high school, K to 8, 5 to 8, just so I have some idea of grade bands, if you want to just drop that info in the chat. So I make sure I'm inclusive of everyone and your needs while we're together today. So we've got high school, K to 8. Yep. All right, great. So I'm glad to see some middle grades representation in here for sure. K to 8, high school, wonderful. Thanks. I will keep that coming. And it looks like we have a good balance. And again, a lot of middle grades representation, which I shared with the last group, we're thrilled to see, because oftentimes those middle grades don't really necessarily know that this is relevant for them or might be something they're going to encounter. And we are seeing some patterns and trends that we'd love to share with you as we get through this presentation. And if you have not communicated with our office before and you're working in a K to 8 or 6 to 8, you might need us. So we're here. Today, while we're together, we're going to talk a little bit about historical context, some of the factors that contribute to why our young people might experience a pregnancy before they graduate. We'll dig into federal and local policies around educational rights for pregnant parenting students. We'll talk about what the Elect program does, and then we'll talk about how we can work together moving forward. So after you complete the session, you should have enough information about the policy to be able to implement its components in your classrooms and speak to it in your schools if you have students that need more information. We hope you will walk away being able to integrate some of our resources. We're going to give you a lot of takeaways and access to a lot of electronic materials that you can use moving forward. And that we hope that this will contribute to all of the things that you will be doing with your students in your classroom and help to ensure that we're being as inclusive as possible of pregnant parenting students, knowing that we are going to come back into buildings and not necessarily know who had a baby. We've been away from our students a really long time. Some of them may have delivered babies in the last year that the school is not even aware of. If kids had their cameras on, you likely were only seeing this high and may not have seen that they were actually pregnant. So we don't have a full understanding of what the pandemic will have done to this population, but we do anticipate an increased need for our services and sort of a spike in traffic as we come back into school buildings and folks see who might need our supports. So we start out with a little historical context. Folks a lot of times want to know how big of an issue is this? How many teen parents are there out there? So we do start with where we began with paying attention to pregnant and parenting students as a specific population of need. So in the United States, we sort of hit our peak in early 90s, 1990. We had about 60 births per 1,000 females aged 15 to 19. This really started to get on the radar at very high levels. And at the time Bill Clinton was president, he proclaimed this an epidemic in the United States, started directing resources, federal resources, not only to interventions, but we started looking at how we were teaching sex education. We started looking at how folks could access birth control, whether that's something they could get with their insurance, with or without a parent, and really started focusing efforts to address the fact that our rates had really spiked at that point. From that point moving forward, you'll see the positive news is we've been on a steady decline. So those efforts to really focus energies to ensure folks had access to what they need to make their reproductive health decisions at a time that's right for them. It appears that some of those efforts have really been effective, but we still have work to do. So we've gone from 60 births overall down to about 20 births. We're starting to see some narrowing of the disparity, the ethnic and racial disparities between different groups. But we are continuing on that downward trend. The same is true for Philadelphia. So I'm starting us in 2006. And the reason for that is because we were still at 2006. We were still at that 60 births. So Philly was a little behind the nation in terms of getting our numbers down. So we were at that 60 births per 1,000 females just in 2006. But across that next decade, we continue to drop. So we have done the same thing that nationally the country has done, and we've reduced that to less than half of that 60. So we are down under 30 births per 1,000 females here in Philadelphia, but that is much higher than the state and national averages. So there is work to be done. The other thing I always elevate is that this is a chart just for 15 to 19-year-olds. There are births to folks younger than 15 in our city, and that number has steadily increased. So while the overall number comes down, that number in the younger population has been bumping up. So it's really important, those of you in those middle grade schools, to really think about what you can do in your school community to address the issue, to make sure that resources are available to students, to make sure they know how to access supports. So I do ask folks to share some of their ideas. I mentioned the comprehensive sex education. You know, the district adopted the 3 R's curriculum not too long ago. We have health resource centers where kids can grab condoms in schools. There's health centers throughout the city. What are some of the reasons you all feel this is still happening at the level that it's happening in Philadelphia? So it could be ideas you have about what's contributing to teen pregnancy rates, or things that you've heard other people assume about teen pregnancy. You can throw your ideas in the chat. If somebody's brave and wants to hop on a mic, you can do so as well. But let's brainstorm some of the things that contribute to the conditions for a young pregnancy. And I know you all are at the end of the day, so folks might be feeling a little sluggish. So if you don't have some, I will share a few. This is going to be the quiet group today. I'll give it just another minute, and then I'll share with you some of the common trends. So ideas about, yep.
I was typing it. I thought you wanted it in the chat.
Oh, you can do in the chat, or you can get on the mic, whatever you're comfortable. Too much independence. So
my initial thought was wanting to be loved, wanting to feel that connection, and wanting to, you know, another big reason that always comes up, other than past history and influences, is that our students tend to say that they feel the pressure that you're just supposed to go and be able to have sex. And then once they get pregnant, they don't know what their options are.
Yep. So those are some big ones, that wanting to feel loved. I've seen that a lot with students who are involved in foster care that I've worked with. I also see in the chat the lack of activities, things to keep them engaged. Love, ignorance, freedom. I think I heard some of the themes of maybe feeling pressured by their partner. So all
Jennifer,
of these. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I also want to piggyback off of Todd on the end part. He said that some people feel pressure. Well, especially our kids, before they get out to our class, before they even get to high school, they're getting their sex education from the streets, from the people around them that maybe are not educated themselves. So some people may think it's a rite of passage to be doing what they're doing. Others might not understand the consequences of their actions or how to prevent it. So if the first people teaching them is now also teaching them, like, oh yeah, by the way, use some sort of protection, they won't. And then by the time they get to us, they already have a preconceived notion. Now, with that being said, I also think that some of the education should be slightly started in the household, just a little bit of education. Maybe they don't got to tell them the whole scheme of it, but like some form of like, yo, this is what X, Y, and Z is, just in case. Because once you run into the situation and you don't, and you're not educated, sometimes for some of these kids, it's too late.
Yep. So those were some of the themes that have come up throughout the day. And that's an excellent point, that sometimes the education isn't starting soon enough. Our kids are all developing at different rates. So when you're going through those lessons developmentally, they may be further ahead than the lessons are. We also have families who may not be comfortable talking about sex. There's cultural implications. There may be parents who don't feel confident about talking about that. So I always have to speak up. Our PASH program that used to be in our office with us, they offer a lot of great resources for parents and some parent workshops and how to start those conversations. So those can be really difficult things, which yes. And also that idea of misinformation and where folks are getting their sex education going on the interwebs. And we all know how much misinformation is out there. Especially we've seen that spike in the COVID period on health education. It's true for their sex education and where they're getting that information. So these are all great. There's not really any wrong answer. These are all contributing factors in some way. But we do like to expand this definition of what these contextual factors are, and we dig a little deeper into some of the things that contribute to this. And I do have to say the research around teen pregnancy is relatively young, because if you're talking about not paying attention really until 1990, there wasn't a lot of studying done on this population to know why this was happening. We've got somebody else in the chat who says some parents don't have the knowledge to teach the kids, and some parents may not allow their students to be part of that education. So we know we have opt-out policies and we're required to do that. So we're hopeful that we're providing enough access points to resources, even if they're not able to be in those sex education lessons. So let's take it a little deeper in terms of some of the contextual factors, and we're going to talk very globally about pregnant parenting adolescents and the research that is available. I focus on research in the United States to make it most relevant for us. But youth experiencing homelessness actually have a higher incidence of rates of pregnancy in the adolescent period. So 1/3 of unaccompanied female youth who are identified as homeless have been pregnant. This is a big one for Philadelphia because our child welfare system is already had to analyze and sort of look at how frequently they're having contact, how many young people they're working with, how many families they're involved with, and whether it's sort of an oversaturation of child welfare system involvement. So kids who are in that space and system involved, who also have a report of abuse and neglect, and living in poverty. So we are in the poorest large city when it comes to young people. So children under 18 in Philadelphia, about 40% are living in poverty. So you've got this perfect storm of system involvement, poverty, that has spiked their increased risk of having a pregnancy. So 30% of students in that category have experienced a pregnancy. Always very transparent about what I have had to learn over my 20 years of doing this work, that when I first started, I had a lot of assumptions on the population that I was working with. So I learned very quickly that this statistic is actually very much true, that LGBTQ identified young people are approximately twice as likely to experience a pregnancy. And we can get into a whole separate discussion on why that might happen, but I'll point out a couple of things that you're already seeing on this chart where these circles are starting to overlap. And you all know the kids you work with don't come in the one circle. They typically come in with all the things. So we're talking about some intersectionality of these risks that are compounding. So let's think about an LGBTQ identified youth who's kicked out of the house because the family doesn't support their identity. They are now in that homeless pot and the LGBTQ pot. They may try to find somewhere to stay that they feel is the safest option, but they may be coerced to engage in sexual behaviors in that household in order to keep that place to stay. So you're starting to think about all these different things compounding, and now we're spiking this chance that this young person might experience a pregnancy. Juvenile justice system is also a big factor in a lot of our young people's lives. There's over incarceration in the adult population. This extends down into the adolescent population. We've got a lot of students involved in the juvenile justice system, and we're seeing both male identified and female identified young people reporting higher rates of pregnancy. And lastly, this is sort of a really big one to think about. I've seen the percentage anywhere from 55% to 66%. We really will never know because there's not always going to be a case where someone has identified that something was abuse. But the estimates are pretty high that a young person who's had a pregnancy has some level of history of early physical or sexual abuse. And I do want to make sure that I'm pointing out that this is not to sort of pathologize or say that every teen parent that you encounter has been through all of these levels of trauma and had all of these experiences. Is possible that they had none of these experiences, but it's really important to think about the fact that these are not choice or behavior based. These are typically experiences that the young person does not have control over. So we really need to expand our idea of what is contributing to pregnant parenting youth and think a little more beyond what the student or the family can control by the time they're 15 and what has already sort of been creating the perfect conditions for there to be this risk. So we'll talk about policy and procedure because some of those circles we just talked about have their own federal coverage. So we've got McKinney-Vento Act to protect the educational interests of young people experiencing homelessness. We've got a number of regulations associated with young people who are involved in DHS systems, CUA systems, foster care, et cetera. The same is for pregnant and parenting students. So their educational rights are protected under a couple layers. We'll start with federal Title IX legislation, which is sort of governing this entire country. So a lot of times we think of Title IX as gender-based discrimination prevention in sports. It may be how do we handle sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations on a campus. But there's a lesser known component that it does stipulate no school receiving federal funding can discriminate against someone because of their sex, which includes discrimination due to pregnancy, giving birth, abortion, childbirth recovery, or any related conditions. So that's a very broad statement, but it's in there. So under Title IX, we're obligated to ensure all of our pregnant parenting students have their full educational experience and that there's no discrimination occurring. Because it's such a broad statement and doesn't really give a lot of the nitty gritty that would apply in our district, we as a district had to look at what are our rules. So my predecessor, Jenna Monley, who's the deputy of the Family and Community Engagement Office, when she was in this role, she really led the charge to look at what was our pregnant parenting student policies, how did it align with Title IX, and what did we need to do to support schools to be better able to implement this in their classrooms, in their hallways, in their buildings. So essentially, Policy 234 has the same goal as federal Title IX, which is to ensure full participation and eliminate discrimination based on pregnancy parenting status. If you want to read the technical policy on the school board policies page, you can link to Policy 234, which is the summary. And then Policy 234 admin procedures are really the nuts and bolts of how do you implement this in a school. We're going to walk through some of those components today. This is a high level dive. Nancy and I have talked about potentially doing some additional deeper dive because there's always questions that come up around these policies since it's a relatively newly expanded policy. You may or may not have seen a graphic that appears like this. We have created this and made this available throughout the city. Community organizations, our students, our families. We've made this available to schools. We're shipping out some additional resources to schools. We have this available as a poster, a handout. We will make sure you have access to the digital file. So if you want it, if you want to print it, if you want to post it, if you want to ask for posters, we have those available. But there are 8 components, 8 sections to this policy, and we'll walk through those briefly. So number 1, teen parent student liaison. So this is one of those additional designations in your building where it's a nurse, a counselor, an administrator who has this additional hat that they wear, where if there's a pregnant or parenting student, this person will make sure they know about Policy 234, that they're supported with accommodations if they need them, that they're connected to basic community resources, and that they're connected to our district supports for pregnant parenting students. So this is where we're asking for your help as well. This is a relatively new component to the policy. We had started doing a lot of education the first year and a half, and then COVID occurred. So we haven't had the ability to get in and access and really communicate this policy with everyone we'd hoped to meet with in the last year. So we are collecting teen parent student liaison designees. Principals are still working out those assignments, but it's truly helpful if you're going back to your schools, you're having meetings, if you're asking, you know what, who is our teen parent student liaison? If you have someone come to you tomorrow and tell you that they're pregnant, do you know who the TPSL is in your building to be able to make sure they're connected? The second bullet is a little more broad again, because there's no one size fits all. There's no finite menu of options. This is reasonable adjustments to facilitate full education participation. So that's a very broad expectation. What does that look like in practice? It's things like the elevator pass to get from one side of the building to the other. It's things like making sure students have access to makeup work when they miss because of being a pregnant or parenting student. They've got obligations like appointments and things like that. It may be adjusting the roster if they can't get to school on time every day because they've got to get to childcare. The childcare doesn't open early enough. We're facing some very early start times for school for our high school population. That's really going to be a challenge. We are going to work with our students to help them plan and be prepared. But there could be a situation where they need an accommodation because they just cannot make it in the door by 7:34. It could be moving around the metal detectors when they're coming in the morning. It could be for physical education teachers adapting an actual like team sports activity and giving the student an alternative activity that still gets at that heart of the content, but make sure that they're in a safe space and it doesn't impact if they're having any sort of health complications with the pregnancy. Teen parent leave we'll dig into deeper. So I'm just going to briefly mention that we have a teen parent leave policy and we'll get into what that looks like. We have breastfeeding accommodations. So our students who deliver and who are pumping and who are still breastfeeding their child are allowed to have time to breastfeed during the school day. They need to have adequate time to pump. They need a safe place to pump. They need to make sure it has access to electricity, preferably running water. It cannot be a bathroom. Students should not be pumping in the bathroom. It's not sanitary. They need to have access to a place to store their milk, and they cannot be penalized if if they're pumping during lunch and trying to get to class, but they need to clean their equipment and put it away. If they're a little late to class, they can't be penalized if they were pumping. ELECT does work with students on breastfeeding plans to sort of figure out the best options for them and when to breastfeed during the day or when to pump milk. School uniform provisions. Our pregnant individuals likely cannot purchase a new uniform every time their body changes. There are provisions for appropriate tops and bottoms in school colors. We get a lot of questions about footwear. We do not supersede the rules about safe footwear for schools. So folks who ask about wearing slides or flip-flops or things like that, that is not sanctioned by policy. You do need to wear appropriate footwear as per school, but there may be adjustments that can be made if the footwear that's required doesn't quite work for the student. Attendance and tardiness, we've sort of touched on this with reasonable adjustments, but there are some additional attendance codes that have been deemed as excused under this policy, which one is childcare emergencies. I like to be very transparent that this entire city and across the country, a lot of childcare facilities weren't able to stay open because of COVID. Some of them will have to close to do COVID quarantine and cleaning protocols. We anticipate some disruption with childcare throughout this year. Those students should be getting excused absences if they do not have, sometimes they just do not have another safe individual to leave that child with, and they should have access to make up work. If they're taking their child to the doctor, that's another excused absence. And we already know that our students who are seeking their own health care, those are excused absences. So I have a question about athletics, and I know that we could spend a lot, I think that's its own presentation, but this does address extracurriculars as well. So this does get into the athletic space. So I will be following up with Nancy and Jimmy Lynch to make sure I'm not saying anything out of turn, but I will say very briefly, this policy applies to the whole educational and extracurricular experience. So these accommodations and provisions very much may apply in the athletic space. But I will make sure if you have targeted questions, you can certainly throw them in the chat, put them on that attendance sheet, and we'll collect those and make sure we are being very specific, because we've had questions about if they tell you that they're pregnant, do they have to go get another physical? Do they have to change something? The general rule is if you're not requiring every other student to provide updated doctor's information to say they're healthy enough to participate. So say someone is out because they had the flu. If you're not asking them to go to the doctor and get proof that they're well enough to be participating again, you cannot do a separate requirement for students who are pregnant or parenting. So there's an important distinction there. And I know I was guilty of it before this policy existed. I would ask students to get a doctor's note to go on field trips. But if you're not requiring everybody to get a doctor's note to say they're healthy to go on a field trip, it's an unfair ask of the pregnant and parenting individual. But I know that raises a lot of questions about safety, legality, and all those things with athletics. So I do encourage you to put any specific questions, and we will, and stay tuned for a part 2 of this training, but we'll stay pretty high level today. We will get into the homebound section, and simply the homebound section just indicates an uneventful pregnancy and childbirth is not an automatic grounds for assigning a homebound teacher. Per policy at this time, that is not under the homebound category. We do have some provisions in place for ensuring that they have access to their assignments. Confidentiality is a big one. This definitely it raised a lot of questions in the last session, but it is important to know that if a student is disclosing pregnancy status or parenting status, that's protected information. So schools will say, do I have to call a parent? The answer is no. Do I go tell the nurse? The answer is no. Do I tell my principal? The answer is by policy, no. However, there's always exception to rules, right? So we want to make sure we are not superseding any mandated report or immediate threats to safety that may be disclosed. So we did have one or two circumstances with middle grade students that it was perceived or felt or seemed likely that it was someone who was an older aged individual in the home that was the perpetrator of actual abuse. So those situations, we are now not in the policy 234 space, we're in a mandated reporter space. And I won't go too deeply now. I will say we're going to put something in your hands to help guide you if you're not sure of your obligations. There is a graphic about Pennsylvania law and age of consent. But very briefly to summarize that, if you are a middle grades teacher and you have a 12-year-old that comes to you and says they're pregnant, that is a report. Those who are under 13 cannot consent to sex with anyone of any age. So two 12-year-olds cannot have sex in the state of Pennsylvania. So you're really looking at that 12-year-old cutoff as a really big red flag. If they are 13 and they disclose a pregnancy and they tell you their partner is 14, or maybe you know that they're together because they're a couple in the school, that is not of concern. Where we start getting into an issue is that 13 to 15-year age range. If someone between 13 and 15 has sex with a partner who's 4 or more years older than them, you're now in a danger zone again. So that's a report. From 13 to 15, they cannot consent to sex with an individual 4 years or older than them. So 13 and 17 is a flag. 14 and 18 is a flag. 13 and 15, not a flag. And lastly, once they hit 16, they can consent to sex with someone of any age per Pennsylvania law. And I know that feels very alarming to a lot of folks. We're just sharing the law. It doesn't mean there's not other conversations that could be had. But as of 16, they can consent to having sex with a partner of any age. So again, we will share our toolkit with you. It does have a graphic that you can use to refer to, but you can reach out to our office. We work very closely with Rachel Holzman in the Student Rights and Responsibilities Office to ensure we're advising on best direction if you do feel a report is necessary for something you're encountering with a student. Recording pregnant parenting students, this is not something any of you have access to do. So nurses and counselors are the only individuals in the entire school population who can enter a pregnant parenting status. They have access to view a specific tab that is kept separate from the educational record. However, they need to get consent to put that student's information in their status. They should also be asked if they're okay with that information being tracked. And the purpose of that tracking is to make sure we're resourcing schools appropriately, that we have the program where we need to, and that any student who's identified has access to services and supports and accommodations. As part of policy, all students who disclose pregnancy and parenting need to be told about ELECT. So you are not in a position where you would have to get a student to commit to signing up for the program. You're not trying to convince them to sign up for the program. We really are just asking for folks to ensure students know we're available and to ask you to get them to us if they consent to a referral. They can tell us no once we get to them. We spend a lot of time talking about the program, telling them what we offer. If they ultimately opt out, then they have that option. I know we have another question about consent. I will tell you that I'm not an expert on PA law over time. I don't know that I've had any time period where I've known it to be 15. It's been 16 for a considerable amount of time. Hopefully that answered that question. If not, feel free to reach out. All right, so let's dig into teen parent leave, because some of you may have someone who is going out on teen parent leave in your classroom. So again, this is a 30-day period. It's a 6-week period and it doesn't start till the child is born. So it's not like adult maternity leave, where you can opt to go out 3 weeks early to get ready for baby. This particular period of time begins at birth and runs for 6 weeks after birth. However, a physician may say you can be out early because of a medical reason, or you can be out longer because of a medical reason. But by policy, what is guaranteed is that 30-day, 6-week period. If a student wants to come back sooner than that, they're eligible to do so. They are not mandated to stay out. It's just they have that coverage period for 6 weeks by policy. So what we're encouraging teachers to consider, and this was a different conversation before we went through the COVID period, we used to encourage folks to consider setting up a Google Classroom for their pregnant parenting students who might be trying to do work from home, to record some lessons, to provide them online modules that are asynchronous, to be able to let them log in and listen in class, having set times for the teacher to connect with the student to make sure they understand any homework packets that are given. It's a little different now because we've had 18 months almost of doing these practices that you can now use as tools when someone is going to be out of your classroom for 6 weeks. The elect case manager, if you have elect in your building and that student's in elect, typically leads a lot of this effort. We'll be communicating to say, so-and-so delivered, they're on their teen parent leave until this date. We are requesting homework assignments at this time. We are coaching our students to have those conversations in advance. And we have created a teen parent leave academic plan where you all can decide up front. You have a computer, you have internet, you feel like you want to, try to keep up with your work every single week. Let's do weekly assignments. Or you're going to have the kid that's like, I can't even handle school for 6 weeks. No one's there to help me. I don't have a computer. They, by definition and policy, can take full leave for that 6 weeks. And then they must be given the opportunity to make up that work, and they can't be penalized. So they have to return to their same academic standing. So that takes a little negotiation with each student to really understand what resources they have and what's possible and sort of where they're at and their learning and comprehension to see what level of supports they're going to need while they're out. To briefly cover some of the resources we make available to our pregnant parenting students, ELECT is really the comprehensive Cadillac program that we oversee out of this office. It provides the most comprehensive level of support, and it's right in your buildings, out in the community, and in students' homes. As a component of that, we do have a fatherhood initiative. So we do have dedicated fatherhood supports because research tells us dads need to be able to be in their own space together to connect and talk about fatherhood issues. So one example of how we do this is every Friday throughout the pandemic, we had Fatherhood Fridays at 2:00. Dads could join in, chat with our fatherhood coordinators. We have staff who are dedicated to work with our dads and really just sort of let an open discussion about what was relevant to the young people at that time. To give you a little background about ELECT, this is a state initiative. It's a grant-funded initiative. There is ELECT all over Pennsylvania. We are not the only ELECT program in the state. We are the largest ELECT program in the state here in Philadelphia. We are the grantee as the school district. The funds come from Pennsylvania Department of Education and also Department of Human Services. I like to clarify, it's not DHS in the foster care child protective services sense. It's the division of DHS that oversees cash assistance, which is called TANF, and it oversees what used to be called food stamps, which is now SNAP. So that's the division where our funding comes from. And the reason they created this initiative was that a lot of young women were dropping out of school in 1990, finding out that they were pregnant, and then they were seeing young single mothers without a high school diploma coming in and applying for cash assistance. So those two entities came together and put resources right in the school to support them where they're learning, to make sure they could be successful and that they had support when they leave. Initially, it was just for moms. They realized shortly thereafter that dads need the support too. So at this point, we serve students of any gender identity who are expecting or parenting. We do subcontract with community-based organizations. So those of you who've engaged with an ELECT case manager, that is someone who is employed by one of the organizations you see on the slide. Those individuals are tasked and brought on board with a district to be able to hire that staff, train that staff, and have them working in the schools with your students. We started out in 1993 with ELECT here in the Philly School District. It was at 3 small demonstration sites. It is now at over 100 education programs. We have expanded beyond just public school buildings. We serve middle schools, high schools, cyber, charter, GED, opportunity network schools. We're able to serve any licensed school any school licensed by PDE in our Philadelphia County area. We can continue to expand at any point. We add new sites all the time. So if you don't have Elect now and you find that there's a need for it, reach out and we will get a contracted provider connected to your building to support. Overall goals of the program when the state created it was to make sure kids were graduating and entering the workforce. So that was the 90s version of Department of Public Welfare. For us, we want to make sure they have all of the support that they need to sort of be fully functional and productive and the best parents, the best students, the best citizens they can be. So that's why we offer such a comprehensive menu of supports through the Elect program. This is just a summary of those supports. So case management is really the sort of backbone. It's individualized. As I shared, we do that work in schools, out in the community, in their homes, and that's year round. So we've been working throughout this summer to get our kids revved up, excited, ready to come back to school, make sure they have uniforms, childcare, all of the things that will help them to be successful. We address transportation needs, childcare. We'll address attendance challenges to eliminate barriers. We ensure that we're providing sexual health education, referrals to sexual health services. We want to make sure we are reducing the incidence of unplanned secondary pregnancies. And those of you who are familiar with Elect know that we offer workshops. So we have grant mandated workshops that we must offer. Topic areas are selected by PDE, and they are not just parenting workshops. So we like to dispel that myth that we just do parenting workshops. We do post-secondary readiness, employment readiness, general health and wellness. We do life skills overall, healthy relationships. We do enrichment. We've done cooking and nutrition. So we really, and Kelsey's our tech support today, and she leads that work. She's our education coordinator. She also was a Philadelphia school district teacher as well. So, and she's been a facilitator at one of our provider agencies. We spend a little time dispelling some of the myths about teen fathers. So we're going to do some myth busting here with this slide. And if you walk away with nothing else in this section, other than this one thing, this is the one thing we want everyone to walk away with. This is why it's so important that we invest in our dads and make sure that they feel connected and supported to be part of that family experience, is that when they are empowered to be part of that pregnancy and parenting experience, everyone in that whole unit does better. So that baby has better birth outcomes, mom has less stress, better physical and mental health outcomes, and dad has that self-efficacy and does better as well, which trickles over into the school space. We hit some 3 primary assumptions about teen dads, and these are some of the pervasive things that we assume about dads, or folks might assume about dads. And one is that they're not going to pay child support, they're not going to be financially invested, or they're going to be unable to provide any level of support. So that young mom is often warned that she's going to be on her own. But the truth is that young dads are more likely to be providing informal financial support. And again, this is all research. I've got the link at the bottom. This is something that we support with our program. We'll talk about our Baby Bucks boutique program in a moment. But it's really important to know that they are contributing. Sometimes they just need a little coaching and guidance to understand what that could look like. Also, another misconception that our young men have multiple partners. They're not really in relationships with these girls. These girls think that having a baby with them is going to make them be in a relationship, but the opposite is typically true, that the majority of our young dads were in a relationship before this pregnancy occurs. And the last one is, we often assume that the dad is not going to want to have any part of this, that they're young, they don't have any income, they don't know how to be a dad. But the truth is, they feel really good about themselves when they're involved in this, and they do want to be part of it. But a lot of times our dads need more coaching to even know what a father looks like beyond financial support. So sometimes we have to really get into those like assumptions about gender roles and what a dad is, and provide them the opportunities to know how to be part of that and to feel good about themselves when they are part of that. We've got a lot of really active dads, and some of them are fully custodial fathers. Some of them are, share custody with their partner. A lot of different circumstances, but a lot of great dads that we're working with. And we do elevate this because we are talking about a 2-generation impact that impacts all of us, because the little people are going to be in our schools one day as well. So research tells us that, we know mom's impact is great and all, but if dad is added to the equation and is involved in sort of the school experience and learning opportunities for the little person, that little person demonstrates healthier behaviors, better academic performance, and learns more when they hit our doors when they're coming into pre-K and kindergarten. So it's really critical that we invest in our dads, that we don't overlook them. A lot of times there's an assumption that ELECT is there to support pregnant moms. We're here for anybody of any gender. We really focus a lot of efforts on our dads. So please connect with us if you've got dads who might need us. We do have some auxiliary supports. We have a very comprehensive incentive structure that includes baby bucks. So as they're meeting goals, achieving goals, completing tasks, doing all of the things that they want to do as young parents, they're able to earn baby bucks from us. They can utilize those baby bucks in our baby boutique program, which is a boutique style setup here at the district. We've been doing this virtually where they can shop remotely. They can look through the screen. We have somebody who sort of personal shops for them while they check out the inventory. And then we also have some limited in-person appointments. This program is almost 10 years old at this point, and the reason it's such a big incentive for the program is that we are trying to mitigate the impact of young people leaving school because they feel the financial burden of making sure they have these material supports for their child. So we sort of frame it as, you know, school is your job, so to speak now, and here's the incentives and the ways you can earn to support you and your family while you're in school. Through that boutique space, we also offer a car seat loan program and passenger safety workshop. So Lamar Brennan, who is our program coordinator who oversees fatherhood services, also facilitates passenger safety workshops. They get a car seat. We do safe sleep workshops, and they can get a pack and play. We have a membership to Cradles to Crayons to get some additional emergency resources. And I am going to share a quick little tour of our boutique since it is one of our premier offerings.
Welcome to the ELECT Baby Boutique. I'm Brianna, ELECT Program Support Specialist, and I am here to help you with your baby boutique shopping. Here, we strive to support you with things you may need for your little one, yourself, and your family. For students who are expecting a baby, we offer chest, breastfeeding supplies like small breast pumps, milk storage containers, and nursing rooms. We have bottles, tummy time mats, sleep sacks, burp cloths, and more. We offer a variety of things from small items like baby bottles, diapers and wipes, blankets, bath sets, dress detergent, and baby clothes. We know your little one grows up so fast, so we've got things to help them on their way, like baby proofing and safety items, toddler beds, potty seats, pull-ups, sippy cups, grooming kits, dishes, and utensils and tools. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about you. It's important to take care of yourself as well. We have some self-care items for students of any gender, like lotions, soaps, bath sets, menstrual supplies, and deodorant. Maybe you need things for the house, like pots and pans, kitchen towels, dish soaps, and we've got that too. Looking for a job? We offer a selection of ties and some polos for school uniforms or an interview outfit. Student, here's something you want? We've got SEPTA trip passes and gift cards from a variety of stores too. We know how hard it can be being a young parenting student, and we want to make sure that you have what you need so you can focus on school and being the best parent you can be. Set up an appointment with us today. Ask your ELECT case manager for more information.
All right, so that was a little tour of our space. Really briefly, we do have a breastfeeding support initiative for those students who come back to school and don't want to bring their pump equipment or maybe deterred from continuing to pump because they don't want to bring it with them. They don't want to call attention to themselves as they come in through the scanners in the morning. We do have hospital grade breast pumps that we can deploy out to schools. They were donated by Medela, who manufactures breast pumps. And we have the support of University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, who provides guidance and coaching and advises us on the procedures that we have in place to ensure those pumps are used safely, that we're providing the correct sanitation and cleaning products. And we do provide all the students with their individual kits who are using those pumps. It was a relatively new endeavor right before we closed schools for the pandemic. It is the first of its kind that we have found in this country. So we were featured in the American Journal of School Nursing because it was such an innovative approach. And we do hope we will get it back up and running soon because all pumps were in use when we did close. And we hope this is something that we can continue to grow and expand to make it easier for those who do choose to pump. And these pumps are really efficient. It minimizes the time that they're out of class and allows them to transition very quickly back into their education program. This is our first student who adopted use of the pump. This is one of our breastfeeding champions. They walk through and educate the student on how to use the pump, how to keep it clean, and they make a plan for where to store the pump in the school. All right, we are going to take about 7 minutes to do a quick breakout discussion activity. I'm going to throw some scenarios into the chat, so you'll want to pay attention to your group number when you're invited to join a group. Hopefully Kelsey is getting folks set up to jump out into their breakout groups. These are some quick scenarios that you're going to consider. What sort of reasonable accommodations might you make for students in this particular situation if they were in your class? And Kelsey, if you just want to let me know if you are set up.
Should I click it?
Yeah.
All right, should I open the room?
All right, I know we have some folks who've joined back into the room. So if you are somebody who feels like you want to report out on your group, we're only going to probably have the time to share one report out because we are approaching the end of time. I'm certain you all are aware of that as well. So if you are someone who wants to share out, please feel ready to get on the mic and share a little bit about your scenario and what sort of accommodations you might have come up with. Everyone should be back in about 5 seconds. All right, so we now have everyone back in the room. Is there one brave group who would like to share a little bit about their scenario and 1 or 2 accommodations that they made?
I was in the group. We had the fourth period girl who was 8 months pregnant, and she was coming to class late because she waited till everyone got out the halls for her to walk down the steps. I was based on what we went over. We talked about how she should. I might have missed it, but she should be able to get the pass so that she could leave early. Also, she should also be able to get elevator access as well, so that she doesn't have to worry about the congestion of the hallways and falling and bumping into people. So that could solve her lateness or accommodate her transportation access. And when she's 8 months pregnant, we also agreed that every woman or girl 8 months pregnant is different. But if she is able and allowed to walk at that point, walking is still an option.
Yep.
Scorekeeping is still an option. Attendance taking, managerial game positions is still offered to her so that she's not in the action, but also still somewhat participating, because we all feared for her bumping into a boy. Oh God, no, please don't let her fall or like get elbowed or anything. Just at 8 months, it's just a lot of precautions.
Yeah, and that's great. You brought up a lot of the great points, and those are a lot of the accommodations that can be made. There can be alternate assignments given, so they're still connected to that learning opportunity, but not necessarily in the fray. But if a student chooses to participate, they're able to participate. So I know that raises a lot of questions, particularly for folks who are athletics coaches. So again, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have another part 2 where we can get a little deeper dive on some of those legalities and those concerns that you might have. But thank you for being the person to report out to the group. I know we only have a few minutes left, so we're going to hit some of our partnership opportunities in the future. I think you all are pretty aware at this point of how we sort of align with some of the work that you're doing in the education in your classrooms and the year at a glance, the lessons and modules you go through. There's a lot of intersection for pregnant parenting students where it could be very helpful to make sure that they're engaged with ELECT, that they're attending workshops. We are part of that whole school, whole child model, which is that CDC approach to wellness for students. ELECT, PASH program, Eat Right Philly, we're all sort of add-ons and enhancements, so we all contribute to that work. Kelsey either has dropped or will drop a link in the chat in just a moment. We have a pregnant and parenting resource folder that we make available to everyone in the district that we present to. Inside that Google resource folder, you can bookmark it. You can pull out digital marketing materials. These are our postcards we have in there. We have a policy graphic. We have a couple policy handouts. We have that digital toolkit, which is really for the teen parent student liaisons, but it's got a lot of good information for anyone who wants to take a look. And inside that liaison toolkit is that age of consent PA laws around who can consent to sex and at what age. I know there were some additional follow-up questions. So Kelsey, if you have not already dropped that in the chat, please make sure it's in there. We're asking you all to share this with a colleague. So health and physical education is the first large division of teachers we've been able to meet with. There are other subject area teachers who would benefit from some of this information. We are asking folks to help us spread the word. We're happy to come out and do these presentations, even just for one school, for one team. We love to make this information available to as many folks as possible. And we hope it has contributed to you being able to create a classroom that gives space for those students who may not have told folks that they're expecting and that they come into your school classroom. We are available. So this is our general information, our email alias, and my contact information. If you have follow-up questions that you want sort of on record as we build out the next part of these presentations, feel free to reach out. If you have specific scenarios, feel free to reach out. If you're encountering students and you don't think you have elect, contact us. We're happy to help and support. And I know we are right at time today, so I'm going to thank everybody for your participation. Hopefully everyone has done the sign-in sheet. If you have not, the link has been in the chat a couple times. Kelsey has dropped it one last time. Thank you all for coming. We'll hang out for a second. Great, thank you. If anyone has any lingering questions you'd like to present, you can feel free to hang out with us and we will address those.